Hello, everybody. I am so pleased to welcome a friend and a colleague and an esteemed author. I'm just trying to get the copy of her book, the cover of her book up here so I can show you. We have the fabulous author of Fix Your Period on today on this episode of Meet the Experts, and we're going to be talking about all things menstrual and menstrual health and what we can do to really take charge of our menstrual health. So, Miss Nicole, could you introduce yourself and just tell us a little bit about you, your journey, and how you came to write this amazing book?
Thank you so much. Such high praise. I really am so grateful for it. I'm the unlikeliest period girl. I was never meant to do this work, and somehow it just happened, because life just has a way of making that happen. And for me, it all began when I was really young. I had pretty decent periods at first, and then they progressively got worse. And there was a horrible period pain, really heavy periods. And the feeling as a teenager of not wanting to go to school or not really wanting to leave your house for fear of leaking through your clothing or just being in so much agony and waiting for the Tylenol to wear off, that kind of feeling. And so that went on for many years. And my mom at the time had terrible periods too. So she just assumed that this was kind of the period rite of passage. It's unfortunately that is generational. And so I ended up starting to notice that my period would come every 3 or 4 months instead of every month. And at first I thought, okay, this is a blessing. I'm so happy that I don't have to get my period every month. Anyways, fast forward a few more years of that, and I finally saw my gynecologist, and she promptly wrote me a prescription for the birth control pill, and all was well in the world for a few years. I remember just feeling like I had my life back. I was now having periods consistently. They did not hurt anymore. They were not heavy. I didn't have spotting. I didn't have crazy mood issues, all the things. And then I became the poster child for the birth control pill side effects. And yeah, things did not go well. So I remember starting to get these yeast infections and UTIs, and then they started to come every single month. And my gynecologist was a revolving door, and it was just a mess. And I remember having joint pain, gut health issues. My hair was falling out. I had developed melasma all over my face. I know, when you're 21 and you can't have sex for fear of a UTI.
It's not good.
It's awful. Yeah, not good. So I remember a dermatologist saying to me, oh, that melasma thing only happens to women when they're pregnant. I'm not sure what's going on with you. So of course I felt like a complete freak. And eventually I'd given up on modern medicine and went and saw an acupuncturist. And that was the catalyst for all this change. And so I came off the pill. I slowly changed my life, my diet, lifestyle, stress management, all of it. And completely changed careers because of this. I was in film production. That was the goal in my life. And then I completely changed and started to get into the health and wellness, studied to be a health coach, studied with Jessica Drummond, and, did the 1-year women's health coach certification, did a 1-year certification with Chris Kresser in functional medicine and nutrition, and just really got into the work and needing to, because I knew I needed to help women figure out how their bodies worked. That was ultimately the goal for me.
I think that's such an important statement because, I posted on social media a couple of weeks ago about bikini medicine and how for a long time medicine has really been based on men and men's needs and men's physiology, and bikini medicine basically adding in some breast health and gynae into the mix and just sizing everything down. But we're not small men, we are completely different. We have different hormonal cycles, completely different physiology. And I think it's fantastic that there's been, pardon the menstrual pun, but the floodgates really have opened, over the past couple of years with female-centric health and wellness resources. And, I'm going to put your book front and center with that as well, because for a long time, periods weren't talked about. Remember those ads where you would see like the girls rollerblading in their white jeans? It was an ad for Tampax, and they would have like the blue fluid dripping down onto either the pad or the tampon because red would just be too confrontational, a little bit too close to the truth, so let's pretend it's blue.
Exactly.
And you can do all these great things now when you've got your period, but let's not actually talk about the reality of what happens with menstruation. So I think to break that cycle of silence and to create a space for conversation. It's really that's why your work is so important, I think, in bringing this into mainstream conversation for 50% of the planet's population. You know,
Absolutely.
it's vital. So I was telling you earlier that I made an announcement on social media that I was going to be doing this interview with you, and I said, what shall I ask Nicole? And again, you know, floodgates open. So we are going to jump in with our Q&A session and and just, you know, tap into all your wisdom.
Okay.
So I suppose the first thing is, you know, one of the questions that kept coming up is, what is normal for periods? Can you talk us through what is, you know, quote unquote, if anything, you know, can be described as normal when it comes to periods in terms of length of cycle, length of bleeding, color, and pain particularly is one that I would love to talk about.
This question is so necessary to answer because of the sheer volume of women who have no clue what's considered normal for a cycle, much less a period. And I probably get, I don't know, maybe 20 or 30 questions a week, whether it's on Instagram or via email asking, you know, I have this thing, Nicole, is this normal? And it's so frustrating because we're just in the dark, kind of feeling around, trying to figure out what's going on. And so the first thing I say with a cycle in general is your menstrual cycle. You know, I like to see something between 25 and 35 days long. So consistently showing up within that window with not too much fluctuation, not like 25 days one month, 35 days the next month, you're back to 26 days the following month. I really like to see more consistency, as in your period, you know, the fluctuation is maybe just a few days, 2 to 3 days within that 25 to 35 day window. And the reason I say that is because what's happening in your cycle that's causing ovulation to be delayed or to even come early every single month, and why is it not, you know, just falling in within a consistent window? So 25 to 35 days. Over 35 often means, you know, ovulation is delayed. Why is it delayed? Are you super stressed? Are you not eating well? Do you have polycystic ovary syndrome? Is something else happening that's causing ovulation to not occur? And then on the flip side of that, when we have a short cycle, 24 days or less, what's happening there? Are you ovulating? I see a lot of that. Like, you're not ovulating, so you're just bleeding early in your cycle. Your progesterone is low. Your luteal phase is short. So all of those oftentimes are what's contributing to a shorter cycle. And I see heavier, more painful periods with those short cycles. So like I said, 25 to 35 days. And then with the length of your period, it varies, of course, as we know, right? The science is a little all over the place, and you know, women's bodies, of course, vary too, because that's how we are. So 3 to 7 days is kind of the ideal. That's what I look for. And then, you know, we take it from there, because I always say to women, it's not just about the length of your period. It's the big picture. It's how long your cycle is, you know, what your period looks like, how much pain you feel, all of that stuff. So 3 to 7 days, and then over 7 days, oftentimes that's heavy bleeding. That's, you know, likely too much blood loss. It's usually indicative of something else going on, possibly endometriosis or adenomyosis or something like that. And then on the other end of that spectrum, oftentimes 2 days or less, or just spotting or very light periods, usually indicates like a lack of ovulation, possibly, as well as, you know, possibly PCOS even as well. And, you know, a situation where you don't have enough estrogen, your uterine lining is not building in the way that it needs to in order for you to have an adequate bleed. So with that said, I feel like you mentioned pain, and that to me is it's one of my biggest issues. It's like a big beef with conventional medicine, because we're so often dismissed. And I find this fascinating because when your knee hurts or your back hurts or your leg hurts or whatever hurts, they're usually going to help you try and figure out what's going on. They'll likely give you pain medication, but they'll try and get to the root of it. But your uterus hurts? No, that's totally normal. And it's outrageous, right? Oh, it drives me crazy. So yeah, with
that sort of level of pain, it's very much either end of the spectrum, because either we'll ignore it completely and here's some ibuprofen, or let's just do a hysterectomy and take it out.
Yes.
You know?
I know. There's no middle ground apparently anymore. I know, it's stupid. So what I say to women is, if you need more than 2 ibuprofen per period, per cycle, not per hour or day, or you find that your period pain is disrupting your life in any way, like you're stuck in the bathroom, on the bathroom floor, you can't go to work, you can't go to school, you can't, do the things that you would normally do, and you're just relegated to bed or the couch, that to me is a sign that you've got to further investigate. And this is shocking most of the time to women because they have just been told the complete opposite. And it's just like, grin and bear it, take those ibuprofen and get on with your life. And to me, that it's the worst advice that you can give, because of course there's a fire burning below the surface and we're not putting it out. So I would say that. I think the other thing too, like you mentioned, period blood color and spotting, I think are two big ones. I find that, when you're talking about period color or blood color, there's a range of reds, of course. And so I don't want anyone to freak out if they think that this, the blood isn't bright red and it's not what it's supposed to be. We like to see that fresh or red blood color. But I do think that, it comes in a variety of flavors, colors, that sounds so bad, shades of red. So the only thing I would be concerned about is when you see really dark brown, even black type fluid, and oftentimes that's more sticky and not really a good flow. And that usually is indicative of period blood that is moving slower, it's been oxidized, and oftentimes, and you know this, and I know this is your work, so oftentimes it's, a structural issue. Something's happening with the uterus where it's not able to expel all of the blood from that cycle, and then you'll notice it again at the end of your period, or you'll notice it at the beginning of the next period. So I tell everyone to defer to someone like Michelle when, like you, when they have that issue happening. I don't know if you have thoughts on that one.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'd like to, ask kind of a follow-up question, even a little bit with that. What for women who find that they're starting to pass quite large clots? Because that was a question that came up a while ago in a conversation. I was talking about, the period underwear. And and the woman I was talking to was asking, well, that's fine, but will they be able to deal with, large clots?
Yes.
And like, well, hang on, before we start talking about whether or not they can deal with that, let's just dial that back a little bit. Can you share your thoughts on what happens when periods change, as a reflection? I mean, I think there was an interesting article that came out a couple of years ago talking about periods really as the fifth vital sign, which I think is great, because they give us so much information about what's going on. But if someone's been having relatively normal periods and now they're starting to pass larger, heavier clots, what's that saying about their menstrual health?
I think it's saying a couple of different things. And it's really funny because I actually also wrote about that in the book, where I was talking about period underwear as well. And someone asked about, what about smashed up looking blueberry type periods? And I was like, hold on, lady, we need to talk about that first. Forget the period underwear. So same thing. I think that yes, periods definitely change throughout the menstrual life cycle. And of course they do. And so when you're starting to pass bigger clots, I think anything an inch or bigger is possibly problematic. And if it's, if you're not flowing anymore, so if you're noticing that it's clumpier and the flow isn't like a cranberry, a maple syrup type consistency, that's when you should start to pay attention. A few clots here and there, I don't consider to be a big issue, but if it changes drastically, for sure, start to look into that. But oftentimes to me, that indicates that there is, there's an estrogen dominant situation happening. So potentially, progesterone just isn't doing what it needs to do to the uterine lining. And so estrogen is just building and building because it's that stimulating hormone, whereas progesterone is the calming, let's smooth that lining out hormone. And so we may have a problem with that. And that's, I'm sure you see this too all the time, that this is the ongoing issue with women in their 30s and 40s in particular, because ovulation tends to sputter at this time. We're under more stress in our lives, usually during that time in our lives than any other time, really. And, this is really a challenge because there's also pregnancy, postpartum, all mixed into that, and then perimenopause. And so ovulation is this thing where I just feel like we don't really talk about it enough, and it needs to be spoken about so much more. And the fact that, we make the majority of our progesterone to essentially combat the effects of estrogen through ovulation. And so if we're not ovulating consistently, that's where we have to look and figure out why that is. Because ovulation inconsistent ovulation is, to me, is just a sign of all the factors that are in our lives that are not working for us. And that's, this ongoing psychological stress that we're all dealing with, the physical stress, the food, the gut health issues, gut infections, liver detoxification problems. We could go on and on. So I think that that's really what we have to come back to, is like, are you ovulating? And if you are, great. Is it a healthy ovulation to produce enough progesterone? So do you need to test your progesterone to see where it's at after ovulation? And then looking at your estrogen detoxification, possibly through a Dutch test or something like that, to see, because blood testing of estrogen, as you know, can show your estrogen in your blood, but you don't see your estrogen metabolites. And those are what I think contribute a lot to the proliferation of your lining and these big tissue chunks that are essentially coming out of you.
Yeah, for sure. So do you think that's why for a lot of women, I notice as they're going into perimenopause, their period cramping can be more intense? Do you think that's because of maybe they're not producing enough progesterone because maybe they're having these anovulatory cycles now? Or is it stress, maybe because they're not sleeping? Or is it all of the above?
I love that. Yeah, it might be all of the above. What I found, and the reason I wrote the book the way I did in terms of the 6-week protocol and just walking everyone through this foundation, is that for the most part, we have maybe like 2 out of the 6 things, or we have 3 out of the 6 things, and we're doing those pretty well or okay. But that's really where I think we're lacking. I think there's a bit of an evolutionary mismatch, unfortunately, for us ladies. It sucks, and I hate to say it, but we've taken on a lot more in our lives than I think we ever were meant to. And as a result, because of our hormonal makeup, because we have uteruses and make babies, we're a little bit more prone to the effects of the stress and the environmental triggers and, the food in our environment, the poor drinking water quality, all of these things, than males might be. And so as a result, I think that it's a combination, the C, all of the above. We're, when we look at our food, we look at our blood sugar, which is a huge issue, and then our liver and its ability to actually get rid of or break down and then help get rid of these hormones. And then our thyroids as well, and then the stress. So all of it really plays such a huge role. And so that's where, I think we have to try and do a bit from each foundational pillar, is what I think personally.
Absolutely.
Which is really hard to do.
I love the confirmation bias. I completely agree with you. Okay, so some of the other questions that came up: what can we do to manage energy and tiredness and sleep disturbances throughout the cycle? Do you have any strategies for dealing with that?
Yes, tons. I think that when we think about our cycle in general, and I want to just sort of preface this by saying that we're cyclical beings. Obviously, men have this daily cycle, we have this monthly cycle. And as you were talking about this earlier, about the fact that we're not small men, this apparently is a revelation to everyone. I know, it's so frustrating. And right? I know. It's really frustrating. It's ridiculous. I know. So we've sort of been forced into, it's very much a square peg into a round hole type situation. We're forced to live in an environment, in a world that is not designed for our cycles. And that, to me, is 100% a part of the problem. So we have to now, I think, make our lives work for us and for our innate cyclical bodies. So what I suggest to women is that if you're tired in the lead up to your period or during your period, it's because that's how you were designed to be. Sorry, I know that's kind of a hard truth, right?
Yes.
So
Thank
hard.
you. I'm just going to interject with a personal kind of observation, because it actually happened this week and it just ties into what you were saying. So my daughter is 19 and she's just finished her first year in university, and she's a member of the Feminist Society, and they're all about period power and, the revolution. But, one of the things that she was asking me about, because I was telling her about your book and, about what we were going to be talking about, she said, well, if as a feminist we say anything you can do, I can do bleeding,
yes. Should
I feel bad for wanting to take, for needing to take it easy those first few days of my cycle? And I'm going, no. Your body talking to you. I'm going to ask Nicole,
Exactly.
from your mother's perspective, this is about honoring your cycle and realizing that, you know, the daily working cycle that we've all been trained to is based on a male 24-hour cycle. That's why the working day is like 9 to 5, because men are
Mm-hmm.
peaking in the morning and declining as the day goes on. We're on a monthly cycle because we're just more evolved. That's just
Aren't we though? Thank you. Amen to that.
so.
Love that you brought this up. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No. I was just going to say I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. You know, about just the ebb and the flow of the energy throughout the cycle, and how, as women, we really do need to honor that.
We do. We really need to acknowledge it first, that it's actually a thing, and that we're not broken or defective or there's something wrong with us when, you know, a day before your period, you're so exhausted that you just want to sleep in, or you want to go to bed early, or you want someone else to deal with all of the responsibilities of life. It's okay. You're not failing at life, ladies, I promise. But I love that your daughter brought this up, because I think this is the incongruence with the feminist movement. And I'm, you know, a card carrying member of the feminist club. So I'm hardcore, but I also think that it does not mean that, you know, or for me, feminism doesn't mean that you can just do everything that men can do and you can do it exactly the same every single day of the month. Like, it doesn't really work like that. We have to acknowledge our body's cycles, and that monthly cycle is so amazing, because what we can do is really harness the power of it. We can use that ovulatory time when estrogen is high and testosterone is high and our energy is generally peaking to our advantage, and then take care of ourselves closer to our period and during our period. And then we're going to get so much more out of those energy filled weeks that are in our cycle. So if we can do it that way and not constantly be trudging through and pushing, which is very masculine. It's like, you know, we will just, I think that we will certainly be able to not feel like we're dying in that, you know, that week leading up to our period. And we might not notice as many PMS symptoms as well. So that's a whole other thing. You know, it's like this whole time of our cycle, again, if you're just going, like, for instance, I had a woman reach out recently and she said, well, I'm doing CrossFit on day 1 of my period and I have these huge clots that come out of me and I bleed really heavily. And I was like, honey, you do not need to be doing CrossFit on day 1 of your cycle. But it's crazy, because we're, you know, when you think about CrossFit, gosh, that if that was ever a masculine thing, and, you know, the fact that most of the time trainers, generally speaking, are not trained around a woman's cycle and, you know, how our menstrual cycles work, generally speaking. So we're just going every single day, doing CrossFit 3 times a week, you know, in the lead up to our periods, during our periods, and during ovulation, and instead of really working with our cycles in that way.
100% agree with you. Which leads me nicely onto the next question about exercising during your period.
Yes.
How do you feel about that? You know, is there a good exercise strategy for different times of your cycle? What do you think about exercising during your bleeding times, those first 5 to 7